At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Carolyn Trela-Furlow, Program Chair of our chapter, who will serve as a moderator for today's forum. Carolyn, please come forward, and I ask all the volunteers take your positions to be part of this event.
Good morning. At this time, I would like to invite Honorable Claudia Tenney and Honorable Anthony Brindisi to join us at the front table. They'll be picking a card to see who will go first. It is my pleasure to be with you this morning. Before we begin the forum, we ask that everyone turn off your cell phones, pagers, or any other electronic devices. Please do not text, send emails, or take any photographs, or record the questions or responses with your cell phones or any other electronic devices. There are signs calling your attention to this as you entered this morning. The Chamber and the PBW have their own designated photographers for this event. No others are allowed, though the news media has permission to take pictures and to record what is taking place. Personal questions of any nature shall not be allowed. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for opening remarks. The order of speakers was drawn when the candidates arrived, or actually just 2 seconds ago, and will be reversed at the end during closing remarks. During question and answers, each candidate will respond to the same question. 1 response per candidate. Then we move on to the next question and alternate the order of who goes first. We ask that you hold your applause and not make any comments from your seats during the forum because it detracts from the time allotted for the program. Timekeepers will raise a flag showing 1 minute remaining, and when time is up, they will call time and raise a stop sign. When we get within 10 minutes from the closing time, timekeepers will announce that there are 10 minutes remaining in the forum. At the end of the forum, when timekeepers call time, candidates must stop wherever they are in their thoughts. At the end of the forum, the candidates have 2 minutes to wrap up their comments. Now, I'd like to introduce our timekeepers and our pages. We have a page, Sarah Ayala and Michelle Salisbury, Ella Alzheimer, and Beth Jones, and our timekeeper today is Jim Ayala. The rules as presented this morning are in league with Robert's Rules of Order for Parliamentary Procedures covering forums and debates, the National League of Women Voters Forum Debate Procedures, and the basic premise of congressional procedures and the USA National Parliamentarian Association. This forum will end 1 hour after we begin. The timekeeper will ring the bell twice to announce the forum is over. We determine the order, and we'll begin with Mr. Brindisi. Mr. Brindisi, I'm sorry, I'm just going to go right into the questions. You have 2 minutes to give an opening statement.
Is this on? Okay. All right, well, thank you so much. I want to thank first our host, the Rome Chamber of Commerce, the Rome Professional and Businesswomen of Rome. I want to thank our moderator for having us here today. I want to thank all the students who are here today, and also congratulations to Sarah on that well-deserved honor. About a year ago, I was in Binghamton, and I was talking to a father who has a son that has a very rare immune deficiency. He would tell me a story about how he would wake up in the middle of the night very scared to death because he was concerned that his son would lose his health insurance because of the potential repeal of the Affordable Care Act. He was worried because if his son lost his health insurance, he was scared as to how this young man would be able to pay for his prescriptions, which cost $5,000. A few months ago, I was in Oneida County after a town hall meeting, and a woman came up to me. She was a grandmother. She lived on a fixed income, relied on Social Security and Medicare. She would tell me stories about how she sat at her kitchen table every single week, clipping coupons, trying to make sure that she had enough in her savings so she could afford her food and pay for her prescription drugs. A few weeks ago, I was in Cortland talking to a young woman. She was working 2 jobs. She was a single mother. She was buried under a load of student debt, and she was telling me how she has not seen a pay increase in several years, but has struggled to pay her expenses, which keep going up and up. Everything from her gasoline prices, to her cable bill, to the cost of paper towels and Pampers that she buys at Walmart. These are people that I want to fight for in Washington. They are real people in this community who are struggling to make ends meet. They're Democrats, they're Republicans, they're independents, but that does not define them. What binds all of these people together is their desire to have a representative in Congress who does not look for ways to try and divide people. Their desire is to have a representative in Congress who brings people together to solve big problems. That's what I have heard at the 11 open town hall meetings I've done across this area. It's what I've done over my time in the state assembly and school board, working with people like Joe Griffo and Jackie Izzo, Anthony Pacenti, and it's what I'll do as a member of Congress, continuing to bring people together to work on big problems. Thank you.
Ms. Tenney?
Thank you. Thank you to everyone, especially all the sponsors and the students and everyone for being here. This has been a real honor to represent Rome, also this community. I live across the street from the house I grew up in, and that's how much it matters to me. I've stayed here. I fought the battle as a small business owner. It's part of the reason I got into politics very late in life. I was 50 by the time I took office in 2011 as a member of the state assembly. And really, I got into politics because I wanted to help our small business community. And this is what this is all about. This is what drives our economy. This is what helps people. And you're going to have a clear choice in this election. You're going to have someone who's talking about divisiveness already in his opening statement, talking about how much big government can do for you instead of how much our small business community does for us. And as a small business owner, I know how hard it is every single day to try to make payroll, to try to deal with government regulations, to try to pay the huge taxes that New York imposes on a small business community, and to understand how much our small business community gives to our region. Just look at all the people here who are going to be making a donation, the people across our community who are some of the most generous, most giving people in our communities. So I fought to finally get a tax cut that gives everyone a tax cut, and 95% of the people in our communities are finally getting some money. It's literally a transfer of $500 to $600 million on an annual basis of money directly from the Treasury, directly into the pockets of everyday Americans here in our community, and not money that's funneled through one of Governor Cuomo's schemes like Startup New York or the Nano Center or some of these big items that Anthony Brindisi has spent literally billions in taxpayer money to spend for no jobs. 70% of the new jobs that are created in our communities come from our small business community. And I'm going to continue to fight for them as I've done as a small business owner, and I look forward to some great questions today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we will start with our questions, and Ms. Teddy will be first. How will you help DFAS and Rome to combat loss of work cited in the National Defense Act?
Thank you. It's a great question. Actually, we did fight for DFAS. We put in a special amendment under the National Defense Appropriation Act. Something really important. DFAS is actually one of the best, most efficient installations. How much do I have? I'm sorry.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Really efficient for what they do. We also have the luxury of having the building owned by the government, so our rates are able to go down as far as our cost of doing business. But I fought to put an amendment in that would save DFAS. I worked with Congressman Bruce Poliquin of Maine we live every day, there's 435 members of Congress. Every one of them wants to have DFAS in their community. I fight every day to do that. We put an amendment in that was specifically tailored to protect DFAS. Unfortunately, Chuck Schumer pulled it out of the Senate bill, refused to work with us, refused to make that happen. And we've got to continue to fight to work with Democrats in Congress and Democrats on the Senate side who just don't support our communities. They're determined to tax, to spend, to shut down the government, as Chuck Schumer did earlier this year when we're trying to come up with problems and solutions. I know my opponent talks about being bipartisan. Every single bill that I have sponsored as a member of the House of Representatives has been co-sponsored by one of my Democratic colleagues. I work very hard to do that. Even though we're in the majority, I do that because I want to make sure that our bills are looked at from both sides. We work on the language to make sure that happens. We fight every day for DFAS. Also for Rome Lab. I mean, one thing that you're never going to see in the news media is the fact that we actually have brought historic funding to Rome Lab. $250 million last year. That's a huge number. It's a $21 million increase over the year before. So that's the kind of work we're doing. It's all bipartisan. And there are Democrats that want to work with us, but in the end, they all end up with Nancy Pelosi. They won't help us with DACA. They won't help us with DFAS, trying to get it across the finish line, whether it's Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi. And unfortunately, that's what we're stuck with in the Congress.
Thank you. Mr. Brindisi.
Well, DFAS, I'm very happy to have the support of the union that represents the workers at DFAS because of my work with them over the years. DFAS is an important employer here in the Rome area, and so is Rome Labs in the Eastern Air Defense sector. Every year we have to be concerned about threats at the federal level of taking one of these facilities away from us, which would be a blow to our national security, but would also be a blow to our local economy. I'm very happy that it looks like DFAS is growing their operations here. Thankfully, the Senate put in a stronger language than the House did to protect the workers at DFAS. The House budget, the Defense Authorization Act, left a loophole in there that would leave those workers under threat of being closed and moved elsewhere. And frankly, they do it better here in Rome than anywhere in the entire country. They do it at a more efficient manner than other counterparts in other parts of the country. So we have to continue to work together to protect DFAS, protect Rome Labs. Every year I work with Senator Joe Griffo in the state budget to come up with funding to help military base installations. And we do that because of the work here at the Griffiths Business and Technology Park. That money goes towards infrastructure improvements. It goes towards protecting our assets here in Rome. This is a big benefit to our economy for the entire six counties around Oneida County where these workers come from. And it's something that whoever the member of Congress is has to keep an eye on because we are always under threat of losing these installations. Thankfully, we didn't lose DFAS, and we're going to be able to grow that mission here. And it's thanks to work that was done in the Senate, really tightening up language in the NDAA that was left open by the House of Representatives.
Thank you. Mr. Brindisi, the second question. How do you plan to slow and preferably stop the loss of jobs from New York to other regions of the nation?
That's a great question. So I'd love to talk about some of the ideas and things that I've done over the last few years to really work to try and make sure that young people in this region have access to good paying jobs. Because there are good jobs available in this region, and I can talk about one particular area that I have focused on during my time in the State Assembly and want to do more at the federal level. After I took office in the State Assembly, I started to do a lot of tours of small businesses, particularly manufacturers throughout the region. And I remember being at one particular company over in Herkimer County that talked about good paying jobs that they had available, jobs in advanced manufacturing, jobs in the trades. But the owner was telling me what a difficult time he was having finding workers to fill the job openings that he had. He actually said he could hire 5 more people right now if he could find the right kinds of skills for the jobs that he had open. That led me to help create a new pathway diploma for high school students here in New York State called the Career and Technical Education Pathway. There was a study done not too long ago that said over the next 10 years, over half the jobs that are going to be available in New York State are in what's called middle skills, jobs that require more than a high school degree but less than a 4-year diploma. They're jobs in the trades. They're jobs in advanced manufacturing, healthcare, hospitality. This new pathway that I was able to help create here in New York actually helps put students in that pathway towards these good-paying jobs. That's one area that we have to focus on. The other area we need to focus on is something that the President has talked about, which is infrastructure. We can create 15 million new jobs across this country by investing in our infrastructure. That's an area where I'd like to bridge some divides at the federal level to actually put forward an infrastructure package to get things done. And then working to grow our economy, particularly around UAS research that we have here in Rome at Griffiths Business and Technology Park. Very helpful trying to get money the last few years in the state budget to help grow the operations of New Air so we can attract more companies to this region for R&D and to manufacture drones, which is really a growth industry for us. That's what we can do up here in this region. In the southern tier, they have a great company called BAE, which manufactures hybrid electric buses. That's something that's another growth industry for our region.
Thank you. Ms. Tenney?
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that Anthony keeps talking about how many more money you must spend as taxpayers to fund these programs. What we're trying to do is actually have our private sector, the business community, all of you out there, fund these programs through growth. And that's what we've done with tax reform, rolling back unnecessary regulations that have burdened our government. You're seeing an enormous growth in the economy. You're seeing unemployment rates at a 49-year high. I mean, we have so many people that are getting back to work finally. And New York has seen, and Mr. Brindisi has presided in the majority in the New York State Assembly over unprecedented loss of jobs and people in New York State. We are the leader in the loss of people and jobs. Over 1 million people have left New York State since 2010, and they're leaving it for better places, lower taxes, a better economy in terms of job friendliness and creating businesses so they have a chance to grow. But I've also been fighting for a number of issues, including what's going on right here in Rome. As we talked about, Rome Lab, something that my predecessor worked on for his entire term. It was over 10 years. The Secretary of the Air Force said we need a perimeter fence at Rome Lab, and I fought to get that. We worked really hard. We got that included as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, and it was done. And what it does is secures Rome Lab in its place in New York. This is really important. Rome Lab does groundbreaking cybersecurity research. They're a leader not just nationwide, but in the world, and I fought to bring that back. A number of issues, whether it's securing the runway at Griffiths Air Force Base, but more importantly, we're talking about growing the economy. We're talking about more and more people entering the workforce, more and more people having the opportunity to actually have a job and not have to go to college and spend $72,000 a year like it costs to go to my alma mater, which is Colgate University. We spent 30 years trying to make college more affordable, and guess what? It's not. But on that side of it, the career and technical education, President Trump has put an unprecedented amount of resources into growing that and helping people get back to work.
Thank you. Mr. Brindisi.
Is it a new question or am I responding?
Yeah, sorry. No, right. Ms. Tenney, what, in your opinion, is the major change needed in our immigration laws?
Well, this is the big struggle that we've had. Unfortunately, the reality is, and people should really tune in to see what's happening. We have been trying to get some kind of reform on immigration for a long time. We put forth numerous bills in the House of Representatives. We could not get a single Democrat to support us. President Trump rolled back on DACA. So the Democrats, President Obama created DACA, which gave 690,000 to 700,000 DACA, so-called DACA children, a path to legalization, actually. And when President Trump said, we'll give them 1.8 million people, including their relatives, citizenship, the Democrats rejected that even, which is way beyond even what any of the Democrats had offered. So they have a complete unwillingness to try to work with immigration. We have a lot of great people who we think would love to be American citizens come to this country. I've spent a lot of time with the Refugee Center. I used to live in the former Yugoslavia. I was very instrumental in bringing the Bosnian refugees to the region. I started the very first Bosnian newspaper in Bosnia in Utica, New York, and worked with Bosnian immigrants and continued to work with the Refugee Center, donating thousands of dollars of my time, providing them with a newspaper, and also providing the Refugee Center with their passport to America. And so I think a lot of people have to understand refugees are legal. We're providing them a safe haven. It's very important to distinguish between that. But one thing we need to do is make sure that if we're going to have people immigrate to this country, they're going to be people who want to be American citizens. They're going to want to uphold the rule of law. And they're not going to be coming across our border to engage in human trafficking or drug trafficking, which has caused a huge problem across our nation. And so we're going to continue to fight to make that secure a border, to make sure that we provide a path for people to be legal citizens here and provide not living off the taxpayers. And that's what the bills I co-sponsored in the House were and voted for. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a single Democrat to support us in the House.
Thank you. Mr. Brindisi?
Sure. On immigration, I'll talk about that in a second, but on taxes, I'd like to talk about my opponent's record a little bit, because when she had a chance here in New York to vote for a $4 billion tax cut for middle-class families, she voted no. She voted no on a $414 million freeze for New York families and property taxes. She voted no to lower the corporate tax rate here in New York State. She voted to raise taxes 22 different times while she was a member of the State Assembly. She likes to talk about New York, but when she had a chance to do something about it, she did nothing. On immigration, I'll say this. This is an issue that should be solved. It should have been solved back in 2013 when the U.S. Senate passed bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform. She says the Democrats won't come to the table. Well, the fact is she voted for the most extreme version of immigration reform in the House, and she voted against the Republican compromise bill. She voted against her own compromise bill. So here's what we need to do with immigration. We need an immigration policy that is tough but fair. We need more border security, but we also have to recognize that there are people in this country who are law-abiding immigrants, who are playing by the rules, who are paying taxes, and for me, those folks should be able to earn citizenship. We have to do something about our farmers. I've been doing a lot of farm tours over the last year, and immigration is one of the top issues that our farmers are raising with me, especially our dairy farmers who are struggling right now. They are having a hard time finding skilled labor because of the immigration policies coming out of Washington. And when they can't find skilled labor to come to these farms in central New York and upstate New York, that's going to put a lot of these farms out of business. So we need bipartisan immigration reform. Don't believe the commercials you're seeing out there that my opponents are running where she's saying Anthony's for open borders. That's not true. I want more border security. You know, her super PACs are saying Anthony wants to give all kinds of benefits to immigrants here illegally. That's absolutely not true. They're saying I want to support abolishing ICE. Absolutely not true. I support ICE. So please try to read through all these negative attack commercials that are spreading a bunch of lies out there. The fact is we need immigration reform, but we're not going to do it by voting for the extremist version of immigration reform like my opponent voted for.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Brindisi. How do you propose to strengthen and preserve Social Security and Medicare?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up, because in this district we have 167,000 people that are receiving Social Security benefits. I support protecting Social Security and Medicare. I want to see those programs, which Paul Ryan, who was in the district yesterday, likes to refer to as entitlements. Those are not entitlement programs. Those are earned benefits that people worked for all their life, and they should be there in their retirement so they can rely on them. We can do that by making sure that we're not raiding the system, that we're not doing what my opponent did when she voted for the 2018 House budget, which removed $500 billion from Medicare and turned it into a voucher program. That's not going to help seniors in this community who are struggling right now. It's not going to help people who are living on fixed incomes. We need to protect and preserve Social Security and Medicare. One way we can save costs is do what the president called for when he was campaigning. Why don't we let Medicare negotiate drug prices? That would save $240 billion if they could just negotiate drug prices with the drug companies. That's not going to happen as long as we have folks like my opponent in office who take lots of money from the pharmaceutical industry and let them fund their campaigns, because they don't want that, because then that will mean a lower price for these pharmaceutical companies. But it's better competition for us, better prices for us, maybe not so good for the pharmaceutical industry, but we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect and preserve Medicare. I have been endorsed by the committee to protect, the committee to preserve Medicare and Social Security. My opponent has a 14% rating with that group. So she has done everything she can to follow Paul Ryan's lead to try and attack those programs. And he has said that what they should focus on next year to go after this new $1.9 trillion debt that they added because of the tax bill is go after Social Security, go after Medicare. She's been endorsed by a group that actually supported George W. Bush's plan to privatize Medicare and Social Security back in 2005. So imagine that. If we privatized that in 2005, 2008 the stock market crashes. Where would that leave our seniors?
Ms. Tenney?
I don't know where to begin. It's a word salad of lies. I've never voted for a tax increase ever in any place, whether 6 years in Congress. He voted to raise your taxes for, 8 straight years now. Have your taxes gone down? Have you noticed your taxes have not gone down? For the first time in 31 years, we actually have a tax cut. Governor Cuomo, who did a nice secret fundraiser for him down in New York City, Nancy Pelosi, who's given him $14,000 right out of her own paycheck, out of her own pocket, and another several billion. When you see all these ads on TV describing me as somehow involved in taxes, I mean, look it. I've never voted for a tax cut. It's a core principle as a small business person. I know what it's like to make payroll, to pay oppressive taxes, to deal with regulations. None of this is true. This is all a smear campaign coming from Nancy Pelosi's super PAC, where George Soros, who's a socialist, is putting money into his campaign. He just did a fundraiser with none other than Rosie O'Donnell and some of the most left-leaning people down in New York City. Why are they in New York City hiding out and raising money for Anthony Brindisi? And when he talks about corporate PACs and super PACs and all that, there are many people and organizations in this room that are corporations that have donated to my campaign. And they're not the corporation, they're the people that work there, just like the big unions who have donated to him. It's the same thing, except for I'm not hiding any donations coming to me from small business owners in a super PAC run by Nancy Pelosi. I'm actually out standing and fighting for policy. I never voted to hurt anyone with pharmaceuticals. In fact, President Trump just passed a bill we signed into law that is going to help people in the pharmaceutical industry to drive down the cost. He's asking for Medicare for all. He's voted 4 times. You should understand this, everyone in this room. He has voted 4 times for government takeover of your health care, which means all of you, any of you who have a private health care, you will get your health care through a union, you're going to lose your health care. And it's going to cost the taxpayers of New York somewhere between $92 billion and $120 billion annually in new taxes. Ask him how he's going to pay for that.
Thank you. Our next question, Ms. Tenney, this is actually from a student. If elected, what do you think should be addressed first? What issue do you think is the most important?
I think the most important issue facing our nation is getting people back to work. We need to have people working so that they can earn a living, they can take care of their families, they can live the American dream. We've seen that in huge decline. One of the most important issues that I've stood up and fought against was some of the bad trade deals that have been signed into law by prior presidents, President Clinton, for example, NAFTA. We've lost thousands of jobs overseas. High taxes, high regulations have hurt New York State. We have spent more money in New York State, $8 billion annually under Governor Cuomo. All of this Anthony Brindisi voted for. Startup New York, $700 billion we've spent on the Nano Center so far. Another 300, 400, 600 million of taxpayer monies we're going to spend on building a hospital and squeezing it into downtown Utica. And anyone who disagrees with him, by the way, you know what he called you when the emails revert. You're an idiot, or is in the case of our great John Scarano from Herkimer County, where he refused to do any kind of forum with him. All these town halls he's talking about. Why wouldn't you do a forum in Herkimer? Because you described Herkimer County and their economic development efforts as useless. This is the kind of person that says he's going to stand up and help our employers, our job creators. It's really important that we get people back to work by cutting taxes, giving some regulatory relief, something we've done in a huge way, but negotiating bad trade deals. And talk about our farmers. Our farmers are struggling and suffering because of the cost of doing business in New York. He voted for a minimum wage, which is the highest in the nation. For the first time ever, we did not have an exemption for agriculture for our farmers. They're struggling, they're suffering, they're going out of business. You're seeing suicide rates up. I've been fighting for the farm community. I have family members who are involved in dairy farming. This is really important, but they create jobs too. And they put food on our table, and they're very important in the mix. And so that's the most important thing, is getting people back to work.
Thank you. Mr. Brindisi.
Well, I will correct the record a little bit, and I encourage all of our fact checkers in the media over there to go check it out. But you did vote against $4 billion in middle-class tax cuts here in New York State. That was the largest tax cut in 20 years. You voted against $414 million in a property tax freeze. You voted against the $350 child care credit. You voted to raise taxes 22 times. You voted against lowering the corporate tax rate, which would help
Totally
many
false.
businesses. That's not false. You can check it yourself. That's a fact. I also would love to to hear your plans on Social Security and Medicare and how you decided to cut $500
Can
billion.
I cut into your time? I'll explain it.
No.
No, it's my time.
Sorry.
Thank you, though. You cut $500 billion out of Medicare. But here we need to talk about what's the priorities going forward in Washington. For me, the number one priority is we need to focus on rising premiums that are affecting everybody right now in this community and across upstate New York because of the 2-year assault on the Affordable Care Act and because of the repeal of the individual mandate, which now insurance companies in this state have said they need to have double-digit premium increases. The one reason they said they need that is because of the repeal of the individual mandate in the tax bill. Everyone's premiums in this congressional district, a study was done not too long ago, will rise anywhere from $650 to $2,500 because of the tax bill and the constant assault on the Affordable Care Act. We need to look for bipartisan solutions in Washington to help bring down premiums. That's what I'm committed to doing, working with both sides to do that. Not voting for a health care bill that's going to kick 23 million Americans off of their health insurance or strip away protections for people with pre-existing conditions. 40,000 people in this district would have lost their health insurance if that repeal bill had gone through. There are 289,000 people in this congressional district who are suffering with pre-existing conditions. To take away protections from them, I think, is heartless, and we need to do something to make sure that we're strengthening the Affordable Care Act, bringing down premiums, and making sure that everyone in this country has health insurance, because it's a right. No one should have to go bankrupt because they can't afford to pay their medical bills.
Thank you. Our next question, Mr. Brindisi. New York's energy prices continue to be some of the highest in the nation and a direct impediment to doing business in the state. What is your plan for helping to lower those costs?
Well, here's a few things that we should do. A few years ago, I actually voted to take away a energy surcharge that was put in place after the Great Recession that raised everyone's electricity bills here in New York State, whether you're a business or a consumer. My opponent actually voted against taking away that surcharge in one of our budgets. Here's what we have to do. I served on the Energy Committee here in the State Assembly. We have a tremendously old infrastructure in our New York State. Our energy grid is decades old, and it causes problems by trying to bring on new forms of energy to get to areas around the state where it has to go. We can encourage more wind, more solar, more renewable energy, more hydroelectric power if we had a 21st century energy grid. Up in the North Country, up in the St. Lawrence, where they make hydroelectric power, at certain times of the year when there's peak demand, they actually have to dump power off away before they can actually get it onto the grid because the grid is too overloaded. If we can get on more forms of energies, particularly renewable energy, that will help lower energy prices for us here in New York State, but we have to make investments in our infrastructure first to allow that to happen. That's something we have to work at the federal level. I appreciate the President's call for more infrastructure spending. I don't necessarily agree with the way he wants to do it by kicking the costs down to the state and local governments, which are already struggling. But I think we can come together in Washington, working with the President, to have more infrastructure investments so we can work on our roads, our bridges, our crumbling water and sewer systems, and our energy grid, which will become more efficient to bring on more forms of renewable energy, and then we can lower everybody's energy prices.
Thank you. Ms. Tenney?
Yeah, I feel like we're at the drone site, just droning on and on with trained Nancy Pelosi talking points. She raised taxes. I've never raised taxes. I've never voted to raise taxes. I have voted against horrible spending in the New York State budget. I voted against all of Governor Cuomo's high tax and spend policies in New York. He voted for almost all of them. If you're talking about the middle class tax cut from 2011, I voted for the middle class tax cut in 2011, so go fact check that. And good luck fact checking anything with our local media because they're so busy erasing all the negative references to Anthony Brindisi that were on their website. We actually had to send an intern to the public library, and thank you for Jervis Library for being here, to find out the truth about real fake news in Oneida County. The Utica OD is actually erasing references that would be negatively impact Anthony Brindisi on their website. That's incredible. So that's what we're up against in this situation. So you can't really fact check anything unless you go to the library. So thank God we have Jervis Library and some of these great libraries around the community. But let's get back to what's going on with energy. Right now, New York State is on a path to, our energy prices are going up. He voted for this. The energy prices are going up. We are going to be forced to comply with his renewables plan. All of our manufacturers, all of our individuals. It's going to continue to raise rates on people who are the least able to pay it. Our HEAth program, people that are in need of energy assistance are going to be struggling. But yes, here in New York State, We are the only state in the entire nation that does not allow responsible gas drilling in some of the richest Marcellus shale that we have in the southern tier, which is part of this district. Now, many of you don't realize, but Binghamton and the southern tier have it. There's responsible ways of doing this. There are ways without using fracking fluid. It's something that we should be looking into to lower our rates. Natural gas is being pumped into New York City. All those people, Nancy Pelosi, Andrew Cuomo, all his friends, Sheldon Silver, his old best friend, are stopping this from happening in New York State and denying the ability of people in New York to be independent on production and saving money on gas production and on energy.
Thank you. Our next question, Ms. Tenney. What is your opinion as to the effectiveness of the President's action on international trade and tariffs?
I think the President is taking a bold stand. He certainly changed the conversation on trade. We have a few companies right in our community who are very excited about the trade. We have Revere Copper. Brian O'Shaughnessy has been instrumental in influencing and working along with his son, on this issue on trade. Some of the tariffs I know have been a tough thing. It's been hard on a lot of our farmers out in the Midwest. The President understands that, but he's trying to do a basic thing. He's trying to bring our jobs back. And it's really important that people understand that we have been at a huge trade deficit and a huge disadvantage in New York and across this country because of our imbalance in trade. The President has tried to do this in a more targeted way. People thought he couldn't do it, but he renegotiated NAFTA. I led a letter to Ambassador Lighthizer on changing the Class 7 dairy pricing. That's something that was really important to our dairy farmers, which cost New York State dairy farmers about $58 million last year. We're trying to work on issues like that. The President renegotiated in the USMCA, which is the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, which fixed a lot of the terrible things in NAFTA. It helped our local workers, helped auto workers and many of us across the nation. The President is also trying to work on giving some relief to our dairy farmers on the trade issue and how some of them have been hurt. New York State is not really as impacted as others, but I think what he's trying to do is bring back the imbalance. And when you talk about repatriation of money, the tax reform has been incredible. By the end of the year, over $1 trillion in overseas money that's been held by American companies for many, many years, is now being repatriated back to this country. And that's because of the leadership of the President and the House of Representatives. And we are giving people relief for once. Thousands of jobs are coming back to this country, finally, because of the tax reform.
Thank you. Mr. Brindisi?
$1 trillion may be coming back, but that $1 trillion is being used for stock buybacks to help enrich shareholders of those companies, not the actual workers who are working in those companies. On trade, I actually applaud some of the President's moves on trade. This is something that's hurt our area. We've received some bad trade deals that have hurt workers in this area. And when I see a trade deal, what I want to focus on is a trade deal that's going to help American workers, American farms, American business. That means negotiating trade deals that have strong labor protections on both sides, strong environmental protections, which we have here in the United States, but the other countries don't have. They need to be balanced on both sides. We need to make sure that there are strong enforcement mechanisms in place. So if another country violates a trade deal, we have some recourse to go after that country. You know, in the Central American Free Trade Agreement, Honduras was actually allowed to pay workers $1.60 an hour. That should never happen. How can you ever compete in this country when you're allowed to pay $1.60 an hour in another country? That's not fair. So we need to make sure that we have good trade deals with strong labor protections on both sides of the deal. The tariffs have hurt. They have helped certain segments of the economy, but they've also hurt certain segments of the economy. I was down in Portland not too long ago talking to a dairy farmer who exports some of his milk to Mexico. They no longer are importing his milk, which has hurt his bottom line. And when they don't import from him, they go to Central America, they go to South America, and that business is never coming back. So when we do have tariffs, they have to be targeted, and we have to make sure, in my opinion, go after the real culprit, which is China. I would like to see the President leading a coalition of our allies, Canada, Mexico, the EU, to really deal with the real culprit in trade, which is China. They're stealing our intellectual property, they're dumping steel, and instead of alienating all of the countries around the world, let's be a leader and lead against the real culprit, which is China.
Thank you. Our next question is from a student. What are some of the ways you're going to increase educational funding to lower income school districts in the state? Mr. Brindisi?
Thank you for that question. That is an issue that really is the reason why I ran for the assembly in the first place, having come from a school district in the city of Utica that is considered the 5th poorest school district in the entire state. Our educational funding system here in New York is broken. We need to do a lot better job of trying to make sure that funding is targeted to those school districts that need it the most, places like Rome, places like Utica, other areas in rural communities that are high poverty. Those are the schools that really need help right now. We need to make sure that we're increasing our funding to those schools. It's not about raising taxes, it's about making sure that the money that goes into the pot is evenly distributed to make sure it goes to the schools that need it the most. We have a wonderful community here in Utica and Rome. We want to make sure that our students have lower class sizes. And we have to protect our public education and stop trying to privatize everything. Betsy DeVos, I think, is the worst education secretary I have seen in ever. She has done a terrible job of protecting public education. She's doing everything she can to undermine public education and privatize schools. And we need to make sure that we keep that promise that we did 100 years ago, that if a child wants to go to high school, no matter what their zip code is, that they get a sound basic education. So we have to have a lot more oversight, I think, of what's happening at the education department right now, and our education secretary, who's doing everything in her power to go after teachers, students. That's something I've done here in New York State, standing up to the governor. I know she likes to put me in a lot of commercials with the governor, but the fact is, I have stood up against the governor time and time again, whether it's not voting for the SAFE Act, whether it's being one of a handful of Democrats to vote against an education reform bill he put in place a few years ago, whether it was punishing teachers and students, whether it's more currently fighting against his economic development policies. Some of you were there about a year ago when I had a State of the State address in Utica with an empty chair for the governor because I felt he was ignoring this region. I have stood up against people who I felt would hurt our schools, particularly our public schools, time and time again in Albany, and I'll do it again in Washington.
Thank you. Ms. Tenney?
Yes, thank you. Education is a really important issue for me. I actually am the product of public schools. My son went to the same school that I did, had some of the same teachers, incredibly, and rode on the same school bus. I live across the street from the house I grew up in, so you know that we were literally in the same district. Education was important. I was served on the education committee, and I watched time and again all kinds of money and reforms coming to the education committee, and my opponent voted it down, voted with Sheldon Silver over and over, 97% of the time, and held good bills from coming to the floor just because they were sponsored by a Republican. He did that with at least 10 veterans bills that were killed literally in committee just because they were sponsored by a Republican for no other reason. You are seeing one of the most partisan members of the state assembly. They all are in the state assembly. They don't reach across the aisle. They work with members in the Senate who are in the majority. So when they tries to fool you into thinking that, oh, I'm being bipartisan, trust me, if he goes to Washington, he's not going to have a relationship with the president. He's not going to be working with Republicans to try to do what we've tried to do to help this community. He's going to be voting with the impeachment caucus. And if you don't believe me, Nancy Pelosi has allowed the impeachment bill to come to the floor twice, and most of the Democrats have voted for it. We were able to kill that bill, and that's what they're focused on. Not progress, not results that the president has brought and our House has brought, but it's going to be resistance, and I'm going to support results over resistance every day, and I think the American people are showing they will too. And when he talks about standing up to Governor Cuomo, look at what Governor Cuomo has done to education. Look how he's abused our teachers. Anthony Brindisi voted he's now claiming he doesn't have anything to do with it, but you voted initially when teachers were forced to use 40% of their reviews on their APPRs, which is their performance reviews. They were forced to use those in determining what their ratings were going to be and what their pay was going to be. That's wrong. He voted for that twice.
Thank you. Our next question, Ms. Tenney. The president withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Paris Climate Accord. Do you agree with these actions?
Yes, I do. I support them both. And let me first say something. He says he stood up to Governor Cuomo and voted against the SAFE Act. He pretended to be a pro-Second Amendment guy for this ever since the SAFE Act was passed in 2013. Let's fast forward to this year. Now he's trying to pander to the resist movement. he stands up and says, the only reason I voted, and we have this on video, and my staff can share this if you want to look at it up on Twitter and have our fact checkers over there take a look at it. He said, the only reason I voted against the SAFE Act, which took rights away from law-abiding gun owners, was because of the 3-day waiting period was waived on the governor's message of necessity. He's voted on dozens of bills, key bills in the state assembly for that very reason. And he recently said, not only that he would like to impose the SAFE Act nationwide and put that across. That's the reason he has an F rating from NRA, and I continue to have an A. I support lawful gun owners. I also support Remington Arms, which is one of our oldest continuously running companies here. And I do think that we need to start talking about what his record really is on these issues. In getting back to the immigration issue, or the, I'm sorry, where were we at? Trans-Pacific Partnership, yeah. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, I was against before I even got into Congress. It was a way of compromising Americans. The Paris Accords was very unfair to the Americans. I think the president's going to try to renegotiate that just like he renegotiated NAFTA. The Paris Accords made front-loaded billions of dollars for the U.S. taxpayers to pay and to comply with climate issues without requiring some of the biggest polluters like China and India to comply until 20 years down the road. That's wrong. We need to renegotiate those so that everybody's on the same page and the American citizens aren't being treated unfairly.
Thank you. Mr. Brindisi?
Thank you. Well, when it comes to the environment, I very much want to be a member of Congress like Sherry Bowler was. Sherry was the chair of the Science Committee. He's on the board of the League of Conservation Voters. That's an organization that actually has supported and endorsed our campaign. Unfortunately, my opponent has a 6% rating lifetime with the League of Conservation Voters. It was a mistake to back out of the Paris Climate Accord. My opponent has said climate change is not a threat. Well, the scientists have said that within 10 years, if we don't act now on climate change, then in 10 years, it's going to be too late. So we need to be leading. Our country needs to be leading as the second largest carbon emitter in the world. We really need to be leading on fighting back climate change. We can do that by creating more green jobs. Green jobs are great for the economy, and they're outpacing fossil fuel jobs right now. We can have more renewable energy, and we need to focus on green jobs. And I think we need to be a part of a coalition of nations to fight back on climate change, not pull out of treaties like what happened, and then deny climate change is happening like my opponent has done. This is very real. It's very scary, and it's one of the most pressing issues of our time. I can't even begin to rebut some of the things that she has said over the last couple of questions, but I've never voted for the testing bill. I voted against the testing bill that was in place. I was one of a handful of Democrats, you can go check the record on that, to put more testing in our classroom. And I'm not for impeachment. I know that she likes to distract and say that I'm for impeachment. I'm not for impeachment at all. We need to make sure that we're focusing on the issues. And when I do open town hall meetings around this area, 11 of them since we started this campaign, people aren't questioning me about impeachment. They're not questioning about Nancy Pelosi or Governor Cuomo. They're worried about their health care. They're worried about their job. They're worried about their wages not going up. They're worried about the environment. They're worried about their kids getting a good education, Social Security. So she can distract from the true issues in this campaign all she wants and run all the negative ads she wants. But the fact is, people want to hear the issues in this campaign, and that's what I'm committed to talking about.
Thank you. Our next question, Mr. Brindisi, do you think the tax reform bill has been effective in boosting our economy?
Well, it depends. If you look on paper, the economy's doing well. But if you talk to voters in this district, as I have done over the last few months, holding town hall meetings, you're finding that this tax bill has not benefited the people in this district to the extent it should have. Here's the biggest problem. 83% of this tax bill, 83% of this tax bill went to the wealthiest Americans and major corporations in this country, creating $1.9 trillion of new debt. And what are these companies doing with this? What are they doing with their money? Some are doing the right thing and sharing it with their workers. But there was a study done recently by Newsweek magazine that looked at all the Fortune 500 companies, the companies that support my opponent, Walmart, Home Depot, Spectrum Cable, these companies. And they look at the workers that have worked for these companies. Out of all those workers that work for those big Fortune 500 companies, only 4% of them, 4% have seen an increase in their wages since this tax bill has been passed. So it's benefiting someone, but it's not benefiting by and large the people in this district who are living paycheck to paycheck. The people where an average household income is $48,000 are not seeing an increase. And any increase they are seeing is being eaten up by higher health insurance premiums that they're paying right now because of the repeal of the individual mandate, higher gasoline prices, higher cable bills 40 to 50%, higher prescription drug costs. So we do need tax reform, but my idea of tax reform is tax cuts that bulk, where the bulk of it goes to our small businesses, middle-class families, our farms here in upstate New York, working individuals. That's who needs tax relief. Guess what all these companies are doing with their big tax cut? $1 trillion in buybacks. $1 trillion. I talk about Spectrum Cable a lot, and I use that as an example of the perfect example of corporate greed. Here's a company that has a monopoly here in New York State that has spent their last 2 years not expanding their service, not helping out their workers, getting a big tax cut, $9.3 billion, and then donating to my opponent who helps enable their corporate greed.
Thank you. Ms. Tenney?
Folks, this is a really serious issue, what happens in this country. And you're seeing a stark contrast between a big government, tax and spend liberal, and someone who is a fiscal conservative, but has the compassion to understand we need to protect people who can't help themselves. It's something I've stood for from the very beginning. I don't even know where to begin with some of these issues with him. But let's talk about the big companies and the tax reform and the spectrum and all this other stuff he gets into. None of that is true. And in fact, 2 weeks ago, we voted on the House of Representatives to make these tax cuts permanent for individuals. Only 3 Democrats in this entire country voted for tax cuts for the middle class to make it permanent. You know why? They're afraid of the wrath of Nancy Pelosi. And I can't emphasize it enough. She rules with an iron fist, just like Sheldon Silver did when he was ruling over the state assembly. He claims, I know you're looking in your forms there on the nice little flyer here, and he talks about how he stood up as a young gun to Sheldon Silver. Well, let me just tell you the truth about it, because I was there. Sheldon Silver used taxpayer money to cover up sexual harassment claims against innocent victims in the state assembly by Vito Lopez, who sat right in front of me. I know some of these women that were sexually harassed. And here's the guy who claims now he's a champion of women. You know what he did? He voted for Sheldon Silver to be speaker after he breached our rules, violated our rules, and he put him back in office again. And many times he said, look, it could be worse. We could get another liberal from New York City. And that was his excuse for that. And, you know, I stood up to Sheldon Silver in 2012 in the height of his power. I didn't stand up to Sheldon Silver in 2015 as he claims he did in 2015, when Sheldon Silver was basically roadkill. He was already done. He'd already been indicted. He'd been hauled off in handcuffs. And Anthony and the Observer-Dispatch, you can't find it on the internet, but we can give you the papers, said he said, this is a distraction, Sheldon Silver, because he was beholden to him. But he also said he was the last politician in this region to stand up to Sheldon Silver, but could not be reached for comment. You will not find that anywhere online, because the Utica Observer-Dispatch has erased it from every online document and all of their site. You have to find it in the library.
Thank you. Ms. Tenney, our next question. What type of reforms in our government do you intend to make or change?
Many, of course. The reforms that we are trying to make, first of all, again, I can't emphasize how important it is for a small business to have taxes and regulations and that relief, and that's something that we weren't getting in government. He keeps talking about big government programs, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. Let me explain something to you why the Affordable Care Act is so dangerous. It is imploding every single day, and he's running these phony ads that keep saying, oh, she voted for this health care bill. Well, guess what? It didn't pass. It didn't become law. He's a lawyer. He's a lawyer. He should know. So when he's saying thank God, he supports big government takeover of your health care. Big government, $716 billion was taken from the Medicare Advantage plan, the most popular plan used by seniors. 83% of seniors are using that plan. They're seeing skyrocketing Medicare rates. They're seeing all kinds of problems. We have tried to come up with a bipartisan solution. The American Health Care Act, and he keeps talking about pre-existing conditions. Let me tell you something. I co-authored the amendment with Congressman Walden to protect people with pre-existing conditions. The law says, and you can fact check this over with the news media there, the law says Insurance companies shall not discriminate based on pre-existing conditions and must cover anyone with a pre-existing condition. That was part of the American Health Care Act. And he continues to go on about pre-existing condition because it's a droning talking point from the Democrats because they don't know what to do. They have no policy. They're talking about impeachment. They're talking about raising your taxes. They're talking about increased regulations. They're talking about more government to intrude in your life that threatens our seniors. And I just, these are important issues. Every issue is important that we're trying to reform. We're trying to let you get some relief from big government crawling all over your back, give the private sector a chance to grow jobs, to do what's happening. The economy is booming, and that is what we need to continue to do. If we go back, that's what you're going to see. It's going to be a nightmare.
Thank you. Do we have time for more questions?
Do I get the rebut? Do I get the rebut?
Yes. Sorry, Mr. Bernese.
Reforms in Washington. Here's what I would like to start with. And I signed a letter with 107 other members that are running for Congress this year, talking about one of the first things we need to do in Washington is with regards to corruption and ethics. Right now, we have a system. The Bible says that the love of money is the root of all evil. Well, we can see that with who's funding my opponent's campaign. So we need to make sure that we're doing something to get the money out of politics. I'm doing that by leading by example, by not taking any corporate PAC money in my campaign, so I don't have to worry about what favors I owe to the pharmaceutical industry or Charter Communications or the oil and gas industry, which gave my opponent $50,000, or the financial services sector, which gave her $300,000 for her votes to roll back all kinds of financial protections that were put in place after the Great Recession. So we need to get dark money out of politics. There's a decision that came down a few years in the Supreme Court called Citizens United. Worst decision the Supreme Court has ever come up with. We need to overturn that decision. That's not going to happen at the Supreme Court, so we need to focus on a constitutional amendment overturning that decision. Short of that, we need to also do things to get more money out of politics and have more transparency in who's donating to these campaigns. Disclosure is what we need right now. She talks about taxpayer funding of settlements. Well, Pat Meehan, who's a congressman who used taxpayer money to settle his sexual harassment suits, donor to your campaign. Blake Farenthold, another congressman who used taxpayer money to cover up his problems. You stood up and supported him. Rob Porter, someone who was accused of terrible domestic violence in the White House. When he was serving in the White House, you said domestic violence is not a crime of character. So we need to do more like we did here in New York State to stop the taxpayer funding of settlements. They have not done that at the federal level. They should. That's one area where we need a lot more reform. Getting spending limits put in place for these campaigns. This district right here, there was an article a couple weeks ago, the super PACs that support my opponent, they've actually spent more money in this district than any other district in the entire country running these negative false attack ads that you see on TV every day. We got to get that dark special interest money out of politics.
Thank you. Our next question, Mr. Brindisi. Much of New York's infrastructure is old and badly in need of repair or replacement. How do you plan on getting help from the federal government to revitalize and address these issues?
Well, that's a great question. You're right. We have tremendous infrastructure needs here in New York State, really in every state, particularly in the Northeast, where we have to deal with the weather. We have old roads, bridges, water, sewer systems. We've been hit by flooding several times over the last few years because of old infrastructure. Our energy grid, which I mentioned before, broadband. In this district, the 22nd district, where 50% of the district is considered rural, access to broadband is a particular challenge for many people that are in underserved communities. I was actually at a farm over in Madison County last week they have a cidery and they sell a lot of their products at their farm stand, and they have a hard time with their credit card machine because they have such poor internet service. So we need to have an infrastructure package. This is something that the president talked a lot about during the campaign and wants to do as well. And I think this is one of the first areas we should focus on next year with the new Congress, is working with the president to bring more infrastructure investments to places like New York so we can replace some of these old roads, bridges, and finally bring broadband to these underserved communities. When you travel through this district, you can see it. Because you lose cell phone coverage very quickly. Claudia, I'm sure you know that. You lose cell phone coverage very quickly, so you need to have better broadband capability. Companies are not going to want to stay here. They're not going to want to move here if you don't have access to high-speed internet. That's why our libraries are so great, because in many of these small towns, that's the only place you can go to get high-speed internet. You know, if you want to fill out a job application, most job applications are online nowadays. If you're trying to help your child with homework, you want to go on the internet. Good luck if you're home in one of these smaller towns that doesn't have high-speed access. So we need to make sure that we bring broadband to these areas, and this is an area where we should work with the president to try and bridge the divides and finally put forward an infrastructure bill that can help the country put 15 million new workers back to work.
Thank you. Ms. Tenney?
Yeah, thank you. Of course, we've been working really hard on infrastructure, even though we haven't had a massive infrastructure bill done. He's not going to be working with the president. He's going to be working with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and the people who are funding his campaign and telling him what to do. And let's talk about some of the things we've done. We've given out over 60 grants to fire departments to upgrade their equipment and their needs for protecting our communities. We've been traveling all around the district for 2 years to going to all the regions that need water infrastructure upgrades. We just got notified that we're going to be helping out the village of Oriskany Falls with a cleanup issue they have with EPA, working with all kinds of organizations and groups, finding ways to get them grant money and get them money that actually isn't appropriated or is already appropriated and is not new money or new spending or appropriation. So we're working very hard on the infrastructure aspect of it, because we do have aging infrastructure and it's very important. But let me just get back to the millions and one more thing on the internet. You know, you're seeing these ads. You know when a candidate for Congress in one of the most important seats in this nation is talking about a Spectrum ad. First of all, Spectrum didn't give me any money. He is hand in hand with Andrew Cuomo, who created a monopoly, who allowed Spectrum to take over Charter and Time Warner. I'm totally opposed to monopolies. It's against my core values as a conservative. I think we need choice. I think we need to have the option to have, it lowers price, it increases the availability, it hurts our seniors. And I called Spectrum myself. I don't even know anyone at Spectrum, but I called them and I said, you know, I keep hearing about you raising your rates. Well, you know what I did? I made a call and she said, oh, your new package under Spectrum is $70 less. So he's trying to say that I can be bought for $15,000. How about Ray Halberter giving him $1 million? Ray Halberter, the biggest tax cheat in the nation, who's robbed our school districts and our taxpayers. How about his money from Nancy Pelosi, George Soros, Andrew Cuomo? I mean, you name it. And how about the guy who's complaining about super PACs and Citizens United? What do you think the House Majority PAC is? That's Nancy Pelosi's super PAC that's spending millions of dollars. And I refer you back to the Utica Observer-Dispatch and the headline today. Brindisi leads Tenney in fundraising.
Thank you.
I've always been outspent by every opponent that I've ever run against. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Tenney, our next question. What is the one most important act you will take to bridge the divide in Congress?
I think I've already done that as a member of the House. We had the occasion to, and I think I've said this before at the chamber, our freshman class, and that's Democrats and Republicans, we got together and signed what we called a commitment to civility. And by that, we all stuck together. Our class, all but 3 Democrats signed the commitment. We get together, we work in a bipartisan way. It's why every bill that I put out is bipartisan. I'm one of the few freshman members in Congress to have actual bills signed into law by the president. Even though the Utica OD keeps saying I don't have any, I have a number of presidential pens to show that I've been at the bill signings. I got my bills signed into law, and they're kind of cool, actually. So if anyone wants to see those, I got 2 bills in the recent rollback of Dodd-Frank, which hurt our small banks and community institutions. I partnered with Charlie Crist and Brad Sherman, 2 Democratic members who worked on those bills and also got them passed. Worked on a number of bills dealing with opioids and many things. So very bipartisan. I work with my colleague, Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, who's the first black woman to ever be elected to Congress in the state of Delaware. We head up our social committee for the freshman class. We do a lot to get together. I think we have a great relationship. What you see in the media all the time is an attempt to try to stoke the fire and make it look like there's a lot of animosity. There's a lot of animosity out there. It's the resist movement. They can't accept that President Trump was elected, and they're going to continue to fight him. And don't be fooled by Anthony Brindisi. He is when he talks about his 11 town halls, that's usually who's at his town halls. This very energetic resist movement that talks about impeaching the president all the time, talks about Medicare for all, which would take health care away from all of us. They're not looking for solutions. They're looking to resist and take down this president and change the House of Representatives. I don't think we can afford to go back. So many good things have happened in the last 2 years in spite of this very aggressive group. So we're working outside of the resist movement to do a lot of good things for our communities.
Thank you. Mr. Brindisi?
Well, something that I've always done during my career in the state assembly, and I think the people from Rome and Utica, the areas that I represent, know me best, that I'm someone who has always put aside partisan politics. My closest ally in the state senate is Joe Grifo. We work together hand in hand on every issue. I work with the county executive. I work with Jackie Izzo to bring economic development. We work with Joe to bring education funding, infrastructure improvements to this community. I have a track record of actually working with Republicans and Democrats, and I have a track record of standing up to my own party when it matters. That's something I've done in the state assembly, and I'll continue to do in Congress. I'm going to sit down with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, try and find common ground. The president talks about infrastructure. I want to work with him on infrastructure. He talks about lowering the cost of prescription drugs. He has ideas. I have ideas. I want to work with the president on those issues. It's important that you have someone who can bring people together, not divide people. You can have people that divide people with rhetoric, like calling all Democrats mass shooters or saying they're un-American, or saying last week in a radio interview that farmers that support me are not legitimate business owners. That kind of rhetoric is getting us nowhere in this country right now. What we need right now are people who can actually bring everyone together. We do town hall meetings. Some of your staff comes and likes to record us. They're open, they're free, you can ask any question you want. And I think that's important for a representative to be out there and to listen to people. People in this community don't feel like they're being listened to right now by their current representative because she doesn't do town hall meetings. Everything she has is a closed meeting with just her supporters. We used to have town hall meetings when Richard Hanna was the member of Congress. It's something that we need to get back to. And I said when I'm elected, we're going to have town hall meetings in every county in this district every single year. You don't have to screen your questions. You can ask me any question you want. And that's something I've done in the state assembly, working with both sides of the aisle, listening to people, showing up, doing the job. It's something I'll do again in Congress because what we need right now are people who can actually work together to get some of these big problems solved, not people who are going to try and divide us with their rhetoric.
Thank you. At this time, both candidates will be able to give their final comments, and we will start with Ms. Tenney.
Same order as we started.
Reverse. He started first, so now you'll start first.
Just want to say thank you again to everybody here, and this has been an honor to serve this community, especially Rome. I've got my Rome Chamber scarf on today. This is a really important time in our nation. I know everyone says this is one of the most important elections in our country. If we do not retain a group of people, the majority in the House of Representatives, who are willing to work with the president, you're going to continue to see backward progress. You're not going to continue to have the tax cuts, which were made permanent, just waiting on the Senate to have that happen. You're not going to continue to see the kind of progress we've made in the economy and see things growing. You're not going to see people who are really interested in working and changing what's going on. And when my opponent talks about all these town halls that he's doing, they are echo chambers. They're literally resist movements in small handfuls of the Democratic Committee. They're put on by his Democratic Committee. I've done over I think 50 open forums throughout this region and over 100 meetings with constituents, with individuals, opioid roundtables, farmers, business owners, under every sector, veterans. Means a lot to me what we've done to help our veterans. My son is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. I'm really proud I raised him as a single mom. And these issues matter to me. Getting the $2,000 tax credit for women and people who are working parents, meant a lot to me. I brought Ivanka Trump into the district, who's been a leader on that, to help people with that. We are talking about real issues that need to be done. I brought the President of the United States into Utica, New York. The first time a sitting president has come to this region in 70 years. Let me tell you something. Thank you. It matters who's in power and who's in charge, and leadership matters. My opponent isn't talking about the issues that people really care about. He's talking about democratic things that they're trying to distract you from the truth. It's a typical tactic from a slick trial lawyer. That's what they do. They don't talk about issues and solving problems. I know. I'm a small business owner. I was a lawyer. I know how it works. We need someone who's going to have a relationship with our community, who's going to do the kind of work we do and provide the kind of resources that we do. I'm committed, and all these issues matter. And I just want to say thank you again to all of you.
Thank you. Mr. Brindisi?
I also want to thank all of you for being here, and I want to thank my opponent for being here, taking questions today. But after listening to my opponent and watching all of her negative attack ads, I have to ask myself, does Claudia Tenney know who she's really running against? Because I'm not Andrew Cuomo, I'm not Sheldon Silver, and I'm not Nancy Pelosi. I'm Anthony Brindisi. I'm the guy who came back to this community to serve on my local school board to make sure that the voices of children were being heard. I'm the guy who served in the state assembly working with people like Joe Griffo to get things done for this community. I'm the guy who stood up to my own party to oust Sheldon Silver from his office when he was accused of corruption. I called out Governor Cuomo for ignoring this region, and I've said repeatedly, I don't support Nancy Pelosi. I'm the guy that if you send to Washington is actually going to show up, who's going to listen, and who's going to actually do the job, not represent the powerful special interest groups that are funding my opponent's campaign. And when it comes down to it, when you look at the issues, the difference couldn't be any more clear. On health care, she voted for a bill to take away health insurance from 40,000 people in this district, to take away protections from people with pre-existing conditions. I want to work with both sides of the aisle to come up with bipartisan solutions to fix the Affordable Care Act, lower premiums, because I think health care is not a privilege, it's a right. On Social Security and Medicare, she has a 14% rating with the Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare and cut $500 billion out of the Medicare program, turning it into a voucher. Thank God the Senate didn't pass that bill. I want to see a Medicare system and a Social Security system that's strong, that's protected for this generation and for future generations. On everything else, money in politics. You know, she takes all kinds of corporate PAC money, which keeps her from speaking out against things like Spectrum Cable, which are raising cable bills 40 and 50%. 2,000 people have contacted my assembly office about Spectrum Cable and how they're being taken advantage of. They are funding her campaign. Charter gave her $15,000. That's the record of my opponent, taking money from these big corporations, staying silent, and voting on the issues they want, which are directly in contrast with what we need here in this community.
Thank you. The Professional Business Women of Rome and the Rome Chamber of Commerce, thank you for your time spent with us this morning. Candidates, I'm absolutely sure that if anyone has any other questions, they will contact your office.